Hello, I'm Dr. Manuel G. Saldivar. I'm a cognitive psychologist and a university faculty member. On this channel, I focus on ideas and concepts that will help you become more successful as a college student. Please join me for today's episode. One of the biggest challenges college students have as they transition from high school into college is the realization, the expectation that you as a college student have to own your own learning. You need to be prepared to be responsible for being the one who is doing the work, making the effort in order to learn what it is you need to learn in order to earn your degree. So in today's video, I'm going to talk about some best practices for learning in class, and in future videos, we'll talk about some out-of-class techniques you can use. But for today, again, we'll focus on some best practices for learning in class. The first is reflect on the difficulty of the course content. Every course you're going to take in college is not going to be the same, certainly not in the sense of the information, but also in terms of how difficult that particular content might be for you. If you've always had an aptitude for math, then your math classes may seem easy, or at least maybe seem not as challenging as other courses. If you don't like to read long, lengthy written pieces, then a course that has a lot of reading, like a history class, government class, a literature class, is probably going to be more of a challenge for you. Now, challenge doesn't mean impossible, right? You can still certainly persevere and be able to do good work, even if it's a course where you may not have a particular strength in that area, or you may not have a particular interest in the subject matter. But part of being a professional, and again, I assume that you want to be a professional or else you wouldn't be in college. Part of being a professional is being able to understand yourself well enough to know what kind of challenges you're undertaking. I've seen students get into trouble when they don't think about this issue of how difficult a particular course might be compared to other courses, where, for example, let's say a student has a part-time or even full-time job that they need to keep in order to help support their families economically. So they're working a certain number of hours every week, as well as taking college classes. It might be tempting to think, for example, okay, well, I have 4 classes this semester, so that means that based on my work schedule and the family obligations I have and whatever else, I have 20 hours a week to devote to studying for my college classes. And I have 4 classes, so if I divide 4 classes into 20 hours, then that should suggest that I'm going to spend an average of 5 hours per class every week studying. That approach, while logical, the problem with just deciding, okay, I have a certain number of hours a week to study and a certain number of classes, so let me do the division. Of course, you're assuming that all of those courses would be equally challenging for you, right? You're assuming that it makes sense to spend an equal amount of time on all these courses. You're just dividing up your time across all these classes equally. But if you know or suspect, or sometimes after a few weeks at the beginning of the semester, you realize that these classes are not comparable, that your college algebra class is going to need a lot more time from you, will require more effort than your English composition class, for example, then it wouldn't make sense to divide up your study time equally. It might make sense to devote less time to some class where, for whatever reason, you find it less challenging, less difficult, and more time to devote to a class that is more challenging for you. This may seem like an obvious point, but I have seen many college students, and I'm not sure why this is. I suppose part of it may be just human nature. You kind of have a plan and you want to stick to the plan, or you may feel like, well, maybe this week a particular class is more difficult or more challenging than another, but next week that might change. That is not illogical. But sometimes students will stick to a plan like this approach of dividing up their study time equally among all their classes for no particular reason, other than it's just a plan they've already made. So do be flexible enough to take into account changing conditions. You may go into a semester thinking a certain class will be your most challenging, most demanding class. If that ends up being not the case, then you might want to reconsider how much time you're spending on a particular class versus another. Sorry for the interruption, but if you're enjoying this video, please like, subscribe, and click on the bell icon for notifications. The quality of presentation, a term that I'll explain in a second, the quality of presentation doesn't excuse you from the expectation that you're going to own your learning. By quality of presentation, I mean how good a job is the professor doing of actually teaching the material. Now, as a professor myself, I care about teaching, and I believe 99% of the professors in higher education care about teaching. If we didn't care about teaching and working with students, frankly, we could make more money doing other things. But I will admit there are particular days when a professor, including myself, may not be as quite on their game as they would like to be. There may be circumstances where a particular professor's approach to teaching may not be the best fit for all students. These are examples of what I mean of quality of presentation. I'm not making excuses. I'm not saying that a professor who's not a good educator or doesn't take that part of their job seriously, just give them a pass. I'm saying it happens. Sometimes you will have a mismatch between what a student needs or what a student's preferences are in terms of learning and what a professor can actually deliver. The hard truth, though, is this will happen throughout your life, not just in college. You will have bosses, coworkers, customers, clients, patients, depending on what your career is. You'll have people in the workplace that maybe don't communicate in the best way that you think that they should, or maybe they don't communicate in a way that makes sense given the way that your communication style prefers. That doesn't mean you can just walk away. Most of us don't get to choose our bosses. We don't get to choose our coworkers unless you just quit and find another job. Even then, you're really just choosing another job. You're not necessarily choosing a boss or coworkers. The takeaway here is when you have professors who you believe are not teaching as well as you would like, or not teaching in a way that you would prefer, that's a challenge for sure. And again, I'm not excusing that or saying it doesn't matter. It certainly does matter. But again, as a college student, you own your learning. So you have to figure out a way, whether it's going to the learning center on your campus, where you can get tutoring, whether it's going to your professor's office hours to ask specific questions about things that you are struggling with that you maybe didn't understand from the class session. Maybe it's teaming up with other students in your class who may also be struggling with certain ideas, certain concepts, all the above, plus other things. But whatever it is, again, bad teaching, to put it bluntly, or teaching that is not the preferred approach for you, doesn't excuse you from still being responsible for learning. You want to have a good understanding of your learning aptitudes, and this is closely related to the previous 2 points. If you know historically that you've always been really strong in science, and science concepts you just find entertaining, or for whatever reason they're easier for you to learn than others, then that could be advantageous to you in your studying, but that doesn't mean that classes or areas where you don't have an aptitude, subjects where you do have to struggle to learn, those don't necessarily go away or diminish just because there are some areas where you are having an easier time learning. Be mindful as a college student what areas you have aptitudes in, and those strengths can be beneficial for you, but don't disregard the areas where you're not as strong, because there are always opportunities to strengthen yourself as a learner, even in areas where you may feel like, I'm not that interested in the subject, it's not that important to me. You may still have opportunities to get stronger that can only improve you as a student in general. Finally, you want to practice active listening when you're communicating with people. I'll talk about active reading in a future episode, but active listening certainly is an important part of class, whether this is in the context of a professor's lectures or discussions, activities, projects you have to do with classmates. Active listening is an important part of this process, and active listening involves more than just sitting there and making eye contact with someone. I don't want to go into too much detail about active listening here, but I would encourage you to watch this whole series. Episode 11 looks at learning outside of class, just like this episode. Episode 10 looks at learning in class. Episode 12 of this series looks at active listening, and episode 13 looks at active reading. So taken together, the idea is that these 4 episodes, 10 through 13, are related and cover similar ground from different perspectives so that you can walk away with some concrete next steps. To review, our topic for this video was learning in class. So I talked about the expectation that your professors will have, that your college or university will have, is that you as a college student will own your own learning, that you are ultimately responsible for learning or not learning. We discussed some best practices for learning in class, including reflecting on the difficulty of course content, knowing or acknowledging to yourself that the quality of presentation doesn't excuse you from having to learn, understanding your learning aptitudes so you know where you might have advantages and where you may have disadvantages so you can make effort and allot your time and energy appropriately. And then finally, you want to practice active listening when you're in class in order to avoid this trap many students fall into where they tell themselves, well, I can just sit quietly as long as my eyeballs are pointing towards the professor or towards the board. I'll just pick up some stuff like a sponge soaking up water. That really isn't the way that our brains work, and I've discussed this in prior videos. You need to focus your attention. You need to make a concrete effort to attend to some information. That's the way that you really learn it in a deep and meaningful way. Otherwise, you're just kind of memorizing. I hope you found this information helpful. If you enjoyed this video, I hope you'll click on the thumbs up icon below. And if you really enjoyed it, please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications by clicking on the bell icon. YouTube will notify you of future videos added to this channel. Remember, college success is challenging. It takes work and effort, but it is certainly within your grasp. Good luck.